Hello everyone, good afternoon. This is the XDG Tuts version 2.0. Last one was like loss simulation by Jitesh, and this time we have with us Kavin Kumar. So Kavin Kumar is a XR developer, and he is also founder of two companies, right? One is RB Kavin Studio, and one is Orar Studio, which is a London-based company. And today we are here to understand how do we acquire and manage clients in AR VR business, as well as if you want to start your own business, what are the thought processes going inside, and how Kavin has managed all of this at such a young age. So he'll be sharing us with us all the expertise which he has. And also, if you have any questions apart from the questions we have put on the form, feel free to put them over here in the chat box. So yeah, over to you, Kavin.
Yeah, thanks, Kruna. Hey guys, I'm Kavin. If you guys don't know, I go by the name RB Kavin in all the socials. I've been doing this. I used to work for an agency back in 2019, doing social XR, AR and VR, AR mainly, Instagram, Snapchat, AR stuff for clients. And then I started my own thing at 2021, and then now I'm doing it for 2 years solely. So just go through the question sets, I would say. The first is it's more about how to start your own creative agency, or what all thoughts goes behind it. So basically, if you mention as a company, a creative studio agency is completely different from being an individual creator. The first step is because you could register yourself as a studio and then run it. That is one approach where you just get, if you are someone who wants to get a proper license and stuff, you can either start with a simple GST number, because that is where you become a sole proprietor. As of now, RB Kavin Studio, my Indian entity, is a kind of a sole proprietorship where it's, I own complete percentage of it, but people are working with it. So it's kind of easy for you to start with that. Whereas if 2 or 3 people are joining up, you can just see other formalities of what kind of companies to register. But when you're starting it out, I would just recommend going a simple thing where you just start exploring with the clients and then understanding, properly building a proper a portfolio or things like that. Because what happens is, when you when a client approaches you, or when you are approaching a client, having a name of a studio or something which just gives you a great boost rather than being an individual creator, I would say. Because sometimes as individual creators, you might not follow certain rules. You need not follow certain rules. For example, you need not get a GST number, since if you are not crossing a certain limit. That is actually an advantage for you. But what happens is, after a certain age, if you want to work with a bigger company or a bigger client directly, that's where the problem of having these entities will come. Also, if you are working as a company, what happens is you just don't become directly having an affected if there is any issues with the client or the project, because that company entity just becomes a shield for you, and you don't personally get anything. Whereas if you're a freelancer, you just get a lot of things. So it's as starting an agency is kind of more simple nowadays, where you could just get a simple GST certification. That is easy, you can apply it online, and that is all you need if you are a sole proprietorship based company, where you don't need to worry about any other rules. You just have to pay a CA or an accountant for just every 3 months once, so that they can just go through your and then you can pay comply the audit for the GST. That is the one disadvantage if you are starting it as a small person but want to get a GST. It becomes a regular expense where you have to pay the accountant or someone a month-on-month basis to just file your GST, because that is compulsory mandatory. Either you can do it 3 months once, or you can do it every month. But that comes with that, because if you are an individual creator who is just happy with it, then having a GST would be a kind of an upper level, but it's not that much mandatory, because you can still work with a lot of clients and then they don't mind doing it. But only if you're working with a bigger client, that's where the GST comes in. But starting an agency is where I would say this is more of a freelancer, individual company kind of a thing. But if you talk about an agency or a creative studio, that's where you start hiring people, or 2 or 3 people joining together, sharing their expertise and making something. That's where I would say that would be called as a proper creative agency. because few people are there and multiple people are involved, like multiple people are involved in that's why you can just start with an agency. But registration wise, you could just do your, like for example, if you want to start your own, you could just have a partnership with your parents, or like partnership with your brothers or like friends, and then start up a company. And that is all you need to just have a proper company structure in the sales, because that is all you need to have, like for legal terms. But in terms of working with the team, you just call yourself, you can call yourself as a creative studio or like a creative agency. So that is to just start with it, because you just need to understand how much you want to put value, like put your time into it. Because if you register a proper company, there are like always like you have to spend little money every month to just like do the GST filing and or the other filing, so that you become a proper entity. Because once you start and not doing it, that might become a problem for you in the future if you're not properly following it. Because as a creators, what we do is we just don't see this thing, we don't want to involve in these things, we want to get with a client or work on some fun projects and things like that. But once we start a studio or an agency, then a lot of responsibility is there, where you have to like find someone where you're working with them, so that you just divide your time with them, or as in like divide the work pressure with them, so that multiple people can do their own particular job. That is makes your life easier. That would just say. And then
So,
how
Kavin,
to get started. Yeah.
like I wanted to understand before we jump onto the business part. I wanted to understand because see, nowadays we are having this workshop, we are training lots of folks in AR, VR, right? So how, like, what are the ways you will suggest to get your first client? Right? For example, if a student has learned to make an AR effect, so what would be the main like approaches they can opt for to get the clients?
Yeah, like as a student, what I would suggest is like try something called a proactive pitching kind of thing, where as a student, what happens is you build some demos, like you just build what you like. What proactive pitching in general terms means, you actually like look up a brand. Like this is also happens on like a bigger scale too. Sometimes you want to work with a bigger brand. What you do is you just analyze what the problem they have, and then try to create something for their problem and say, this is something we created, we could love to create it for you. Similar to that, instead of approaching a bigger brand or something, you could approach a smaller, either you can collaborate with an existing influencer. I would not recommend influencers 90% of the time, because personal feeling is influencers try to get everything for free, because they are used to get everything for free from their side. Like that too, like the small micro influencers, or like someone who's with 10 to 15k influencers, they are trying to get stuff for free, because only bigger level influencers know if they spend more money like hiring people, they can get a next level. Whereas the micro influencers, or like those who are just becoming influencers, so usually they don't want to pay something. But that's usually you can try to approach a brand, like a smaller brand, saying you can try this in your marketing, and then showcase. Now that we have so many use cases and case studies out there, we can just pick some ideas on the online, saying like how that AR experience can make an impact in their business. Or we can just say this can be like an engaging way for their audience, because you can just, it's similar to how you pitch it to normal like but any other client, where in this case what advantage you have is you already have something you pre-made. You can just show that as an example, saying we could build this for you, where it does the so and so, and then people could record themselves and tag you, and then that creates a social engagement with your account. That is an approach you can try, where you make something and then you try to pitch it to a smaller companies or something like that. Because what happens is, for those people, they might not spend a huge amount, but sometimes you might get lucky and then they might want to spend a little bit of amount. So it's kind of like that play, where you just sometimes you just create stuff and then you put it outside, and then people will approach you. But 90% of the time that might not work. The reason being is they don't know how they would be using this into their own existing business. Whereas that is where you can try to approach multiple companies. Whereas because now that Instagram, every platform is completely free, what you will do is you can just make an experience and pitch the idea to multiple people. If they come back to you, what happens is they become a client, and then that's how you start doing it. initially, because that is easier way to approach rather than try asking the client to come to you. Because what happens is, if a client has to come to you, there is so many levels of complication in it, because you have to be find the client to understand what they need. And then the first like main important is, if a client comes to you, they have to understand how you are going to be impactful for them, or like what is you are doing that is going to help for them. Whereas if you approach someone, 90% of the time client doesn't know this aspect, where they don't know like how impactful or like how this is going to be helpful for them, because all they know is people use Instagram, Snapchat, AR filters for fun. But if we showcase and demonstrate like how it is going to be helpful for them, then they will, when they get to know they are going to get values out of it, then they will be like trying to spend some money on it rather than like trying it. Or you can try collaborating with other brands initially, and then get to track their data, so that you can just use that data to maybe say the client, we help this brand, and then we were able to increase, like create this much videos for them using the same experience and blah blah blah. Using that strategy, you can just try to get a new client. Or like if you're starting out, even that is actually, this strategy is goes for even bigger companies. It doesn't not only applicable for smaller companies, but it applies for everyone who want to land a job. Particular person who has more like the taking the rights of taking this decision, where you'll be approaching them. Whereas initially you can just ping a brand's page, that's all you need. Because if you're targeting a smaller brand, the chance of them viewing this is more, rather than pinning like a bigger brand. Because let's say Coca-Cola or something like that, if you put a message, what happens is thousands of people are putting a message daily. So this method might not work for you on Instagram, but if you get lucky, they might see it. But whereas if you approach a smaller brand's Instagram page, the chances of them seeing is more. So then you can just easily get their eyeballs to do it, like explain what impact it can give it to them. That is how you can just easily find the first few clients. Studio, like sorry, like yeah, either you can just use Unity or Unreal and stuff, or even you can use like a default platform, like for example Android Studio, or like maybe like iOS Swift, to make the application from scratch for AR and VR. Because it's easy to learn, because with Google and then everything out, you can just start learning about the basic concepts of AR and VR. Because if you're starting to learn AR and VR, I would just start recommending understanding about how 3D model and 3D works, because that is going to be the backbone of the entire AR, VR, or like the visualization industry. Because once you get to know it, it's kind of the basics of basics, so that you can understand how 3D model is rendered, and then how a model is being represented, how the textures work and things like that. That's when you can just start with AR and VR. Because if you see, AR is nothing but adding a 3D model into a certain section. Like for example, a machine learning model or like AI is tracking a certain part. It can be a face, it can be a flow, and then we put a 3D model in that spot. That is what AR is in general. To make it super simplified, that is what AR is. So what's happening is, you are not doing that tracking yourself, because if you are doing it, you need to learn a lot of complicated machine learning or like things like that to make the tracking properly and things like that. But as when you're starting out, I would recommend starting with an SDK out there. Like for example, Victoria's, there are so many SDKs out there. Rotation of the faces. This is where the images, if it is an image tracking, this is where the images. This is where the 3D model is. It just gives you the data, and then that data is fed to the 3D model, and then that's where tracking is happening. So to make it simple, that is what an AR is. Whereas when it comes to VR, it's the same aspect, where in VR, you don't need to worry about tracking, where you need to worry about the camera's position of where the camera is, because the camera is going to be the user. So because of that, you just move the user around, and the 3D scene is already set. So you just have to understand about 3D modeling, like how 3D works. Not you don't need to understand about complete 3D models, but you can just start with understanding 3D models, how it works, and then you can just start going with the place, like anchoring points of what kind of technology you want to use it. because as I mentioned, like you can just take the example of social AI, where these platforms is easily accessible for everyone with a link of a button, like with a link. Whereas if you make an AR application, what happens is you need to have a proper device that supports the SDK. Because if you want to try an high-end like plain tracking, what happens is some SDKs might not support it, some SDKs might support it, and then there comes the factor of being the hardware. For example, when I started it with AR and VR, I started with making like AR application and stuff in mobile using Unity. What I did was like I was not having like a complicated for like mobile phone that time. So what happened was I was only going for Fourier, where I went for image tracking or simple stuff, which was not removing the mobile factor, like mobile's hardware in the hand. So you can just start with that, and you can just start with using Unity's. Most I would recommend starting with Unity, because Unity can do both AR and VR. Unreal can do, but Unity is just so simple that it works for sure. Whereas Unreal just becomes more complicated for you to understand, because Unreal you need to have a powerful PC or powerful system to work. Whereas in terms of Unity, it works on even like a smaller budget laptop or something. So you can just start with Unity. So to deal with delaying payments. So that is actually a fun thing, because like this is something you just can't do anything with. Because to be frank, I got paid like for a client. I worked with a Mumbai-based news studio, where later came to know they are used to paying a lot, like really late. I was supposed to pay like got paid on this December, but I got paid on only last month. But what happened was, the one more issue of getting GST is that once you send an invoice out, you have to pay your invoice, like you have to pay your GST. It doesn't matter if you get your money or not, you have to pay your GST. So what happened was I have to pay the GST, and I have to keep on checking with them. Like one thing you can be sure of is I'm actually like making a video about something called an SOW. You have to make sure you have to stock signed with them, stating they are owing you this much. So that what happens is, even if they paid later, you can just use that as a legal document saying that person has worked with you. Whereas if you don't have any proof, like saying they worked with you, like let's say they contacted you on a call, if you don't have a proper written statement either on a mail or on a document agreement saying this is what you're going to get paid for, this is the work, what happens is they might try to screw you, because you don't have a signed one or a proper documented proof. With a proper documented what you can do is, in case they fail to pay you or not willing to pay, you can just maybe take it to a court or something like that. Whereas without those things, you might not be able to do any of it. But I would recommend using like a contract agreement saying they would be paying. And then the issue is that we could try to go to a court or something like that, but we have to like just keep calling them and then checking up with them. Reason being is you just don't want to like burn the bridges between that client, because those people might not know why they are not paying. If it is a client who's doing it regularly, you can try to avoid that client. But in case they are like doing it for the first time or something like that, you can just try to understand and not burn the bridges. But once you go to the court, what happens is there is a lot of procedures and stuff. So I would not recommend going to that. Totally having a proper document saying that you worked with him, the client worked with you for this amount, and then they will be responsible for paying you after the work is done. That is where you can just be safe in case you want to go to court. That becomes a proof for them, rather than us trying to like only use this word of mouth. Because sometimes what happens is a WhatsApp message or like a phone call might not be a proper document, but whereas an email or a documented signature agreement can be helpful. So in that case, what happens is you just try to get a proper timeline set up. Like either you can do this in case it is a bigger client, you can just say you have to pay us within 30 days. Else you will be like added extra charges to it or something like that. That can be an option, but that option might not work out initially, because you have to grow to a certain stage where the client is okay with it. Whereas we can just have a document that says they own you something. In that way, what happens is you just keep on following up with them to just get it paid. Like that is one thing I just felt a lot of times I faced when I was working with Indian companies, where they have so many crazy terms where they say they will pay you after 20 days, but sometimes after 20 days you have to keep on mailing them or like messaging them to just get paid for the work you did. So it's mostly like either you can try to get 50% upfront and then 50% after you finish the work. Sometimes the client might not work with it, because as this the 50% upfront and 50% afterwards totally depends on the clients we are working with, because like not every client have that extra thing on their hand. And then so that is how you just deal with the delayed payment. Like it's more about you have your everything safe in your hand, saying like they own you the money, so that you just keep on following up with them and then get paid. Or you can add a clause in your agreement saying if the client is paying a certain days after, they have to add a certain amount extra to it or something to it. You can just do those clauses. Those clauses might make them pay you on time, but sometimes you just can't do make a client pay, right? Like you have to like figure out that, because sometimes even for bigger studios they get paid later. They have like 60 days period or 30 days period where only after that the invoice would be sent out. Like after that only the payment would be sent out. So it depends on the client. You have to like start speaking about the payment terms in the starting, so that you just don't feel these pressures in the last once the project is ended.
So, Kevin, like for the next question, this is something which we have faced usually. They ask, like initially whenever we approach a client, right? So they ask for ideas, like what ideas you have in your mind to execute. And once we give them the storyboards, like they ask for storyboards, ki, what are the ideas you have? And once we give them the storyboard, it happens like they still execute the idea, but using some another
But
developer.
different.
Yeah. So in those cases, do you prefer to charge for ideation as well?
Come to that stage, what happens is, in order to come to that stage, you have to have that idea of believing that you don't need to actually need that work. Like for example, if you're not having work for 3 or 2 months and then a client comes, what happens is sometimes we might go down to get that client, but we shouldn't be desperate. Like we can be, but we shouldn't show it to them. If we just say it in this way, what happens is they would always think of either like coming with us in case they want. If the budget is big, they don't mind kind of getting us charged for the ideas. So that in this case, what happens is you just say we will charge you for the ideation part because we are pitching it. But once the project is confirmed for the final delivery, like final payment, will deduct that so and so amount. Let's say like it's $1,000 or 2,000 rupees. Like I'm just giving out a random number. Like we will be charging this for the ideation and the mock-ups, but this would be deducted in the final payment you are doing this, so that you can just be assured of it. In this way, what happens is you can charge for your ideas, where you have to be in a place where you don't need to have the jobs. Because what happens is if you are doing the saying like we will charge for an idea, and then the client says we are not going to charge, we will go for another person, you have to let the client leave. Because like if you are desperate for a job, you might try to go back to them and try to do the job. If you have to like be in a situation where you are in an upper hand where you can say no to a job, that's when these kind of tactics might work. The reason being is if you're like they will always try to do this in case they want to see if you really want to work with them. If you do that, they try to like reduce the negotiate the price or something like that. Whereas if you charge a price, you would lose clients initially. If you're doing it for a lot of clients, you will lose out clients, but eventually you will get clients. You will not lose your ideas. We can just try this, because most of these strategies are like even getting paid 50% upfront, or like having an agreement and things like that might be an issue when you're starting out. The reason it's mainly towards since you don't showcase a lot of portfolio to them, or the client don't exactly know what they're looking for. Because usually what happens is clients wants to try something. They might have seen a random filter some big brand use. They want to do it themselves, but they don't have an idea. They will try to get a rough estimate of how it is and things like that. So you have to be in a stage where you have to say, we will charge for an idea, and you have to be in a stage where you are fine with them not coming back to you. Because if you're like, that is when you can use these strategies. If you are like, if you want them to come back to you hoping like this will, that might not work for most of the client. Yeah, so it's kind of like that is the thing I want to mention. But you have to be okay with losing certain clients because they don't want to pay for the ideas. But you have to say upfront that we charge for ideas. If you're not fine with it, we are fine with not working, going it with the project or something. You have to technically like word it so that it doesn't sound offensive or something like that. But you just word it in that way. What happens is if a client comes back to you saying yes, then you are good. Whereas usually what happens is this happened for us recently. We got some UK to my UK studio where we got a mail asking for us to pitch for an idea. This is what we mentioned to them. We said we are going to charge for the mock-ups and ideas. And then we said we are not going to work if there are more than 2 or 3 studios competing for this. If it is more than 3 studios, we are not going to compete in this. Because the reason being is, usually when a client has a lot of people pitching it, then that's where like you have a lot less chance of your idea being accepted. Whereas because they try to get the idea. Whereas if they have an idea and you're pitching for it, that's a secondary matter because you're there. You come with the budgets and stuff, and then your expectation, like your execution style. Whereas if you're pitching your idea, make sure you are okay with not getting that client because that's the stage where you can actually say, "Sorry, we can't work with this project." If you're not going to be paid for the ideation part, but the ideation part is going to be like you're paying for us in advance. So that is the thing. Yeah, should I just switch it to the?
Yes. So in the sense, I think that this meeting will end in another 2 to 3 minutes. So we will paste a new link on the chat. Pranjal, can you just paste it over here? And we can just jump over to that call. Like personal version, na? So
yeah.
So we'll continue the same thing.
Yeah. We can just use Google Meet, right? Google Meet works.
But the recording is not there, no? Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, makes sense.
So take a drinks break, everyone.
The second minute.
Yeah.
We'll meet in 1 minute.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So like I was mentioning, like if you want to charge for the ideation part, you have to let the client know that you would be paid, like they would be charged for like a certain money. But also you can just say that this money would be discounted in the final thing. So that what happens is if the client is going it with you, you are always like the client is not paying anything extra to what you are charging. But if the client is not going it with you, you get paid for what you did. So that is the approach you should. But the only thing here is it just totally depends on you. Because if you want to leave the client, because sometimes the client might not come back to you again, but you have to take that risk. Because unless you are not taking that risk, you might face the issue of the client taking the idea and going for some other person. Even then, the client might come back to you again, might give you a job or something. But in this way, what happens is it's good. Whereas, as I mentioned, we mentioned like as to the mail we got, we said that we'll not be working with, we'll not be pitching any ideas if there are more than 3 companies pitching for it. Because what happens is usually if more than 3 companies are pitching for it, they don't know what they are looking for at the initial phase. Because they said it, they would say it in a simple words, they want an idea. And then what they could do is they could take the pricing from one company and then like maybe the ideation from the other company and give it to the simple idea saying this is our idea, we want you to execute it. What happens is the other person will do it because they are fine, they want to get the jobs, so they do it for that money. So that is what happens if it is a lot like more companies involved. It's more that you have to be okay with not getting the job in the first place. That is the only thing. So you have to take that risk to basically safeguard your idea initially.
So that's actually really a nice approach because like charging for the ideation and then giving them discount if they go ahead. So it's like a win-win situation. Like they also get a sense that if I like pay right now, I'll get a discount if I go ahead with this person. So that's a nice one. And that's like the other question was the feedback cycles. How do you handle the feedback cycles? How many do you prefer?
So like it depends. Like basically, everyone has their own workflow. So when it comes to Aura Studio, our studio, like we call it Aura. So Aura Studio, what we do is we have the first is an alpha phase. The second is like we divided the timeline into like multiple spots. The first two offers like the alpha, second is the beta version, then the final version. So the client gives feedback in the alpha and then in the beta version. Anything after that, we do only like 2 rounds of it. But the thing is, whatever I'm saying might not be applicable for you. Reason being is the scale and the client you're working with. So you have to take this as a rough idea, as a template, and change the numbers and tweak it based for you. Because as we said, right, like we don't mind the client working with us in case they don't want this, they're not okay with our standard proceedings, because we are doing a studio. Because of that, as I mentioned before, like being a studio gives you an extra hand where you have a lot of legal things in hand. Like for example, you have insurance and stuff. That is an expense actually, but those expenses help you in case you are in a difficult position. Where what happens is you can just say no to a client if they are not following your things. So you can just say we do like 5 rounds of feedback. Or like if the client like that, what happens is these feedbacks are usually added into the scope of work. Scope of work is called like SOW, call it SOW. It's actually a document where you agree on like saying this is what I'm going to do for you. This is the service I'm going to provide to you, and this is going to be the deliverables you will be getting. Like for example, your deliverable can be either an export file or can be the entire experience file. So in that way, what happens is you make sure you are only giving what you want, and the client understands what they are getting. For example, they might be expecting an entire complete file, but you would have sent them an export file. Then there would be a misunderstanding at the last. But having this SOW, like a scope of work, can basically remove those things. Also, the same SOW agreement, we just say we have only two changes or revisions with this, which cost you. But whereas we can do a lot of revisions in case you are willing to pay extra. So it's more like you can just say like we can give you one, because you're a first client, we can give you one extra free. That is, you can just say it in the document where you just say 2 is our official revision cycle. But like I'm just putting a number. We can just say 4 revisions or 5 revisions depending on the experience you make, because some might take longer term. If you are actually like working on a bigger project on a bigger scale, there might be n number of revisions, because the client is, we are trying to solve something. Because when it is a larger amount or like larger budget, that doesn't matter. But if it is a smaller budget and smaller matters, that's where you have to put these charges as saying like we do this many revisions only. You're not going to do more than this revisions, things like that. So you just have it in the scope of work document and you just get it signed as you before you start the work, so that the agreement is between you and them, and then they are also agreeing with the same pricing of they are going to pay for you. Or like example, let's say you're charging a daily rate or like an hourly rate. They are going to know exactly what they are coming into. So that document just gives them an idea of like what they can expect, rather than just trying to be like they might be expecting something else and then they might be getting something. So you just put the dates of like revisions. This is how many revisions we are going to give. Or in case you don't want that, you're going to say it to the client in a message too. You're not having a scope of work or something like that. You can just say it to the client, directly saying like you're just going to do this many revisions. But if it is an agency or something, the revisions might increase and reduce depending on the client. So you can just always be flexible with it, but you have to be sure about your time names and stuff.
Kavin,
So
which
which
tool
pricing
do
model?
you use?
Which?
Tool.
Bol.
Actually, fun thing is I'm actually like we are making a post. Like I'm actually making a carousel post of list of tools I use. Like for like basically I use Google Doc. As of now, I use Google Doc for the agreement. And then Adobe, like sometimes I think 99% of the time I use Google Doc, because that's where I just put the document and stuff, because we have Google Workplace, because I got a professional email ID. Because of that, I use it. Also, I would recommend getting, in case you're thinking this as a full-time thing, I would recommend getting a professional email ID, because that might change the perspective for you. Like, because after a certain point, that gives the client a good feeling. Because if you get a Gmail account, like for example, when you get a mail from a promising client and then it is a bigger budget or something like that, if you see a Gmail, you will always think on your back, so is this person really going to be paying me this money, or like he's going to cheat or something like that. Whereas if you have a professional mail or something, it just gives you an extra validation. So like I would recommend that, but we use Google Docs for the documentation and things like that.
The other day, we were having a debate or a conversation type, which pricing model works the best, right? For example, as you mentioned, there is hourly rate, there is daily rate, there is value based pricing, there is complexity based pricing. So what has worked for you, and what do you usually prefer whenever you are approached by a client?
So as of now, what we do is we just have a base fee, and then on top of the base fee, we add the complexity based on the ideas. We add the complexity based on complexity. We add the rate. Like for example, if it is a world experience, we have a certain rate. If it is a 3D models involved, like if you want to build a 3D model, we'll add that. Like it's basically a development as a base fee, and below we add a development charge, as in like a 3D model is a separate fee, and then 2D is a separate fee. We add layers, but we have multiple pricing. For example, as you mentioned, in case that we know it is going to be a longer project, we will go for an hourly or daily rate, because what happens is that is going to be beneficial for us, because in case we get screwed. Whereas if there is a set timeline, we'll go for the normal other pricing, where you're going to say roughly this is what is going to be. The reason being is, if you have a set days, you have to work on those days. So you're getting paid daily is going to be a good thing, because in terms of the value-based proportion and stuff, value-based pricing is there. But as a freelancer or as a small studio, you will not be able to touch that stage unless you have a lot of social proofing and things like that. So like I think like I'll just go with the first one. That is like the day, like giving a set number. That's where it will be helpful for you if they have a set timeline. For example, they wanted to make it in a week or 2 weeks. What happens is, technically you could do it in 2 days, but you can just give it to them after a certain day, because that actually like gives you an extra hand. Whereas if you do a daily rate, what happens is, you just like the first price where you just set a giver, this is what we are going to charge for this. Even you have to mention that you will try to give it on as early as possible. So even if you give it on very early, you don't need to worry about them reducing the pricing. Saying we could just say, we will do it for, we are giving it for this experience, we are charging this. It's not time constraint added. In case the timeline increases, the charges may change. Whereas if we go for the daily rates or hourly rates, what happens is, you have to clock in the timing. They'll be paying you for your timing. So if in case you finish it in 2 or 3 days, what happens, like let's say it is something you already made, and then you're swapping out, you have a template with your hand, and then you're just swapping out the assets, and then you're giving it in few hours or even a day. What happens is, the client will just say, you just finished it in this much hours, why should I be paying more? So it's good to pay with, like, go with what works in that situation, because having a daily rates and hourly rates is so good in case they don't have any timelines with them. Like for example, they want to give something, so you can charge them for each day you're working for them. Whereas if it is like basically a project, a set timeline, and there you can't just say we will be you'll be paying this for so many days or something like that. What happens is, if you're doing it, breaking down the pricing, the clients would always try to reduce the pricing down so that they get paid, they don't need to pay a lot of money. So they will try to cut the cost here and there. So it's better to go with a fixed pricing in case they have a proper deadline with it. Whereas the value-based pricing would only come in if you as a company or a freelancer is so huge in your domain, and you know what you're speaking. For example, you can just say, we have this data, this case study of you have to have multiple case studies. Like case studies as in how you executed the idea for a client's problem and what result you got from the problem. And then you use that, because clients understand these things. If you showcase it to them, what happens is, they know you're able to execute it. And then you can then have an agreement, like whatever it is, basically have an agreement with them saying this is what they're going to do. Also makes your the pricing value, how are you measuring the value? Because the value for each campaign is totally different. For example, if it is depending on the impression, then the client might get millions of impressions. You will be charging for that impression. Or if it is the values, what you're providing is the number of videos people are going to record with it. And then you can just charge with that. Like let's say a few $1,000 for a video, or like $10,000 for a video, like something like that. So because value-based proportion sounds good because we are giving them value, but there are so many people who are talking out there about value-based proportion is good, blah blah blah. But the metrics you are using there, what metrics is like how you are measuring the value they are getting. You have to make sure you do it, like because if you are doing a value-based proportion, you have to understand that you have done it multiple times. Whereas like you've done a normal method multiple times and have data to show this is what is going to happen for you. That is the stage where you can say we can charge with you, like let's say you get so and so values on return. You can pay us 10% of it, something like that. Whereas in that stage, like 10% is kind of huge, but I'm just giving out a random number. But it's more about you have to understand what you value you're giving it to them, because unless you have multiple case studies and stuff to back yourself up, the client might not go ahead with it. And then also you have to understand what value they are getting for, like what is the metrics you're tracking. Because sometimes if you, let's say if it is like a video, that might not give you a proper result. The reason being is we don't know if like filter is used and then is shared in the reels, because there is no way to properly track it exactly, even if it is like let's say Spark Hub or like Snapchat's Hub or something like that, FX Studios Hub. It doesn't properly track everything, so you have to be taking that risk. Whereas if you are doing a custom tracking for the data, let's say if you're doing an AR ads or something, it's taking out there, you can track everything of like how much sales the users have done and things like that. That is where you can go for the value-based pricing. But I would say that is a complicated way, because you have to have done a lot of other works, like for example, like a lot of case studies, and understand what value you're giving to them, and then understanding how you are going to measure the value, and then the goal the client is looking for and stuff like that. So that is where having a simple time-based pricing or like a timeline based, like a fixed pricing would come in hand. Because if it's a fixed pricing, what happens is you have a buffer saying in case even if we finish it early, you can just say we were able to finish it early and then we were able to give you the receipt. End of the day, you need the receipt. Whereas if you go for a daily rates, you can just say we worked on so many days for you, you're going to pay us for it. Usually daily rates are goes for if you're working for a studio, like as an employee or a contractor. That is why you just either get an hourly base. But the issue is that if you're not working on that day, you're not going to get paid for that. That is the thing you have to keep in mind. So just there are so many. It depends completely on the project.
Correct.
And the situation you are in. Yeah.
So what are the best ways to make your portfolios? Like what do you suggest people should have on their portfolios to get good clients? That is something we want.
Yeah. So basically, a client, right? Like the thing is, this is quite a complicated part. Like because each person has a skill what they like to do. Let's say I like, for example, I personally like to do world AR experience and gamified experience because I'm good at that. So whereas I can do face like makeup and stuff, but I don't prefer that. So like a portfolio is just a use case of showing the client this are the stuff we can offer you. So what happens is if you're building a portfolio, take a brief yourself, like rather than creating some filter like an AR experience, just create a brief yourself and then make something with it, and then try to see where it can be helpful for. Like for example, a randomized quiz can be helpful for a multiple stage, but you have to have a different style you're doing it. For example, if you're a makeup artist, like you do like a beauty filter, you are trying to have multiple versions of the beauty filter or like multiple things. For example, maybe your different looks can be a different look, or like how realistic you can do. A portfolio is the page where like it just basically shows the client saying this is the stuff we can do it for you. These are the different things. So depending on your style you are preferring. Like for example, I don't like to work with anything to do with makeup filter or something like that. But as a freelancer, I can take that stand. But as a studio, I can't take that stand because I can do anything I want. But as a freelancer, you know what you like to do and you don't want. So you make stuff you like to do, multiple versions of it, and then you have it in your hand. Like it can be either. As of now, I think like there are so many websites out there that does freelancing and things like that, like website posting for the ideation, or you can use your Instagram page, like separate page where you can just post about it. So that way, what happens is whenever a client says, you can just give them a link to it, asking this is the stuff you had done before. You can try to do it, because a portfolio in the first hand is just simply saying this is something I'm capable of. We're just showcasing to the client, saying why should they work with us, and if you are capable enough to make something what they are expecting. So it's totally depends on like what style you are going for, and building on top of, like if you are gaming for a gaming experience, you get to build interactive experience. You make multiple different interactive experience what you can do, and then have it in a place to showcase. So whenever a client says this is what we can do, and we can just give it to them.
So one thing also, like the most of the folks like who are starting out are students, right? And students generally cannot afford to make their own website and all that stuff. So what is the best platform? You mentioned, of course, multiple platforms over here, Instagram and everything. But what do you think would be the best platform to start with, like when showing, like to make a portfolio, basically?
I mean, like Instagram is the perfect thing, I would say, because you could open Instagram without logging into. Like you can just see the top 5 videos, 3 videos, or something. But I think like if you're starting out, that is the best thing, because Instagram is not stable. Like if you're a professional, I would recommend having a separate website for yourself for something like that. But as an Instagram, as the main advantage of, like, you have to be frank. You have to see if you're starting out, everyone has Instagram on their face. Like before, that is the thing, right? Like, everyone has, like 90% of the younger people have Instagram on their device. So the percentage of people, even if they don't have, the app is going to open up, saying like you just see one or two things. So it becomes an easy, free, completely free. You don't, even if you upload a GB of videos on Instagram, they're not going to charge you for anything. Whereas if you do the same on a Google Cloud, or like let's say Google Drive or something, what happens is it has to be easily accessible for the client. If you upload a Google Drive, what happens is they open it. Like they open it in their own cloud, and they see it small thing. They have to click and then see it, or either download to see the video. Whereas using Instagram, maybe you can try link-free stuff, but because I'm not sure if they have video option. Or you can use YouTube. Basically, you can use YouTube, where you can have a YouTube channel, and then upload all the videos there. What happens, you can just say this is something we uploaded to. So end of the day, just showcasing the final output of the video, and then on everything you can just put a link in the video, so you can just try it here. Like whereas if it is Instagram, it is going to be in the profile. So you can just utilize that skills to use or showcase, because like openly, like yeah.
No. I was just asking what is a review about websites like Fiverr and XR Bazaar, the cross creators? So those who are like providing like XR jobs basically to the folks. So have you tried them, and what is your review? Should you recommend, like, would you recommend it to starters?
So I don't want to speak about the XR Bazaar or like those people, but I can just say like Fiverr is more like you can put it. Like I just don't want to mention, because like the XR Bazaar stuff I didn't use it, so I don't know exactly. That's why I don't want to speak about those things, because I never used. I know the founders of like the cross platform and stuff, like the linked list and like Linktree is like not linked, Lens list and then Lens that people. So like to just give a context, Lens that is an agency who does AR experiences, who also own Lens list. So you can just put the correlation there, but it's kind of where since I don't use them, I don't get it. But it's better to have it on some app everyone has rather than a different website. You have to think it from this perspective, right? Like for example, if you give it in a link or like let's say like cross platform or like XR Bazaar, what happens is they could always have an option to see other creators. Technically, what happens is if you send a link, like if you send a portfolio link of your website or a Instagram page, what happens is the chances of them skipping that profile and finding another person is possible, but it's way less compared to these platforms. It's just you have to think it from that perspective. Like as a starter, I would say like it will not be thinking this much. But like since I've been like doing this, it's kind of like this thought is always in my mind, right? Like what happens if the client is it's kind of like they're just seeing your idea, but they just go outside, they could see multiple thousands of people are doing it. That is what happens is you lost a client there in a way. Whereas they could just see the pricing you do and then the pricing another person do. And then what happens is these marketplaces actually earn like commission. I'm not sure how they operate, like what is their business model or something like that, because they have to run the servers. Like you have to run multiple stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure how they work, but it's that's why I'm just putting this where I'm just taking it, like not taking about a particular thing, but I'm just thinking aspect of like our client will see. You open a link, you are prompt to see. You just whenever you open it, you might see like other creators or like their page information on the menu bar. They are tend to click it. As a person, you'd like to see what is that. You just see it and then you just see the entire website. Even if it is a portfolio website, you see the entire website if you are seeing someone else. Whereas if it is an Instagram or some other platform, you are not going to leave. If you leave, you just see your Instagram feed and not another creator like who they can go for. So that is my personal opinion, but it depends on people, like because you could do it, but it totally depends on your. Yeah.
One more thing, like you have already, like you have also worked in a corporate job, and then you started your own agency. So what do you usually prefer to students and folks who have just started out here? Like, is it like good to have some corporate experience before starting on their own? And if they are starting on their own, then at what point did you feel like, chalo, let's make it as business, like let's make it into a company? So some clear, like if you can clear something over there, it would be it could. Yeah.
So like the thing is, fun fact is the company I used to work is not a corporate structure. It's just a 20 to 30 people company where everyone was in the same floor, literally like less than that, and everyone was in the same floor, and I know everyone there. Like it's not in the corporate structure where it was fun. Like so it was like kind of like I didn't have a corporate structure. Like fun fact is I don't know the corporate structure yet. That's why I learned it after starting my own thing, because there it's usually a business team is there who's like who handles the project, and then there is the development team, and then there is the design team. Only there is these three teams, and then it's like everyone in the business team. I worked with everyone and stuff like that because everyone is accessible. It was like not like a corporate structure, but it is fun. It is actually good to start with a company, because what happens is you don't, unless you are a freelancer who started from the start, you are like an intelligent person, you figure out the workflow. It's easy for you to start on your own. But the thing is, if you are starting like if you want to start out, you can just go for the studio, because you get to understand what the client is expecting, what the client interaction would be. You know exactly how a successful company is working. Like for example, when I started out, I didn't know anything about the business side, but I know about how the flow of the business side works. Like for example, I don't know anything what the communication happens outside my company, but I learned about the communications happening inside the company. Like for example, when a business person comes up with an idea, we do the mock-ups and stuff, and then we just check if that is feasible, and then we do the internal checking, and then we give it to the client. Then the client comes in, we understand the flow. Like you might not know what's happening in the client side, but you might learn how the company organization work, because as a freelancer you might start doing individually, but if you're wanting to scale, that is where you having a good company structure might help, because when you are working alone from the start, what happens is you do everything yourself, but you have to, at a point, you have to work with other people. Like for example, you get 2 or 3 works you'll not be able to do, or you need a separate specialist for like doing a 3D model, whereas you can like hire someone who will be working with them, or like collaborating with someone. So that collaboration part might come if you're working with a studio. But whereas if you're starting out as a freelancer, what happens is you have to learn everything from yourself. For example, I went to my old company. Like in my old company, what we did is they didn't have any proper structure. I have to find, like, as in the business person might have a proper structure, but as a running internal company, we never had a project timeline. How do you schedule the project timeline? How the project is scheduled, and like what is the dead point, like deadlines or like milestones and stuff. We don't have that. We didn't have it. But what happened is when I used to, like, I also, additional thing is I worked with a studio called Unit 9 in UK for 10 weeks, and I worked on a project for a project in Bangalore. So that is where I learned how they work. They operate in a totally different way. But their structure is they have so many people. Like for example, for ideation creating, they have a separate team who does the idea, whereas for development they have a separate team who does the development. Whereas that is not possible in our scale. What we could learn is they have a proper system of how the things flow. For example, how you are doing it. For example, that's how I learned the structure. Like for example, I have a structure where we do the alpha bit and then the beta bit and then the final bit. That structure I learned it through the Unit 9 studio. Whereas you might work in a different way where you do the everything completely and give it to a client. That progress might change depending on who you are. Also, when I started want to do a freelance, actually I was taking a break. I was planning to take a break, and then I started getting a lot of freelance work. Once people started knowing I was not working with the company, because I like most of the work I get is through other creators or other agencies. So once they know, they started, I get a lot of freelance work. That's how I started freelancing. It actually, the starting of studio was actually accidental, I would say, because I was not planning to start a studio, but I was just trying to take a break and see what other industries I can go into. But then I kind of liked it, and then once I started getting a lot of things, I started to have people with it and want to make it a proper company. But it depends on what you are, right? Because, for example, you might have an exposure to how a company runs in the early stage, like by through seeing a YouTube channel or YouTube video or like some videos, you can get an idea. Whereas if you don't have any idea, you're just graduating from like college or something, and then you just get into a company, you get an idea of like how a company works. It depends personally on you, but it's kind of good if you are at what point of stage you are at. Because as one advice is, as you are, right? Like basically you literally mentioned it in the call. Like if you are doing a freelancer, you have to be willing to not get paid at all for a few months. It might take like that is the mindset you have to be in. Like if you're not financially or like have that mindset, because what happens is, I don't recommend doing freelancing for a lot of people I personally know, because I know a lot of people who came to me like to learn AI because they want to earn money. But this is something I say. If you're willing to not get paid for 2 or 3 months and still want to do it, then you do it, because we are in a market where now a lot of people are accessible to it, and then there are a lot of clients out there. But it's just that you might not get a lot of work because there are so many indirect factors out there because of the budget crunch everywhere. You might not get work, but if you are willing to take that risk, you can do a freelance. Whereas working for a studio, you have a set time where you don't need to worry about anything. You can be relaxed. You do the work when you are there. You learn something when you're free there. But once after that, you get your complete time for yourself. Whereas as a freelancer, every time you have to work. You guys know, like for example, you might work at night in case the deadline is so short. You might work on weekends in case you are doing. If you're willing to take that risk, it depends on that, right? Which point of time you might not get any work, get client. You might get a client who's paying you way late, but you have to willing to take that risk.
Correct. So yeah, like most of the questions from our side is so done. Like if anyone in the audience wants to ask anything, feel free to unmute yourself and like throw it out. We'll be happy to take them over to the host. Is there anyone who want to ask anything?
Yes. Okay. Kavin, you have the experience of running a studio by yourself and with a co-founder or a co-partner. Which one would you choose if you have to? And which is better according to you?
So I would choose the with a co-buddy. The reason being is, like when I was running my studio alone, like it depends on the skill set. Like I come from a developer background, but I understand design stuff. But I have a design team with me where I just say this is what I want. But my understanding of a design is completely restricted because I spend a lot of my time on in terms of development. Whereas I have to handle everything myself. Like when I run my studio, like we could have a person there, but it becomes an extra expense where what happens is that you have to pay that extra person to do that particular job. But as a small studio, you don't have that luxury of having a person to make a project manager to manage the project. Whereas you have to do everything yourself because you have a budget. You might have a crunchy budget for a 3D person or 2D person or a developer or a scripter, but you will not have someone who's just managing these people. Whereas now what happens is I don't need to worry about the design side of things because my business partner, she's more of like a designer, like she's a graphic designer, like 3D artist and stuff. So what I usually do is we just come up with ideas. I prefer this way because we are dividing the workplace, we are dividing the work completely to 2 hours. Also, this gives us a scale feature. Like literally, I could handle a complete project by myself, and then she could handle a complete project by herself, and then 2 projects are working simultaneously without any confusion. Let's say if I was an individual creator, I can only manage 2 or 3 projects. Like give a rough number, like I could just manage 3 or 2 projects at a time when I was working alone. Now, even if I'm doing the same level, if both of us are doing it, it's just that we can manage 6 projects. It's because of the ability. Because if you are hiring someone, what happens is, as of now, when you hire someone, it's just you can't say they would be working for your company, or like they will be working with your company, but it's more like they would not be that much eager than your co-founder or yourself, because you would be willing to take that risk, because you are the one who is taking that risk. So what happens is, having a co-founder or something would be helpful, because you take a different role for yourself, so that you manage what is there, and then you can share the workload between each other, and then that makes it easier. Like when it comes to decision making, it depends on who you're working with. Like when you are an individual company, you have the entire decision making thing. But if you are willing to take a lot of work, for example, if you have a lot of capital or stuff like that, which most of the people don't when they're starting a company, where that's where you can have a people who, like person who's a project manager who handles the team, where you just oversight everything. Whereas still that spot is covered, you have to do everything yourself, because you have to do even the admin work yourself. You can't have a admin to do it. Whereas having a third, exactly, right? Having a extra business person, like extra person, you can share the work. Let's say I take the development and administration, you take the designing and ideation. That way, the workload is different, and like it's separated, where you can give a more of your time to make it work.
So one last question from our side, like, what are some of the good studios where folks can apply? Like we all agreed, right? If there is a certain amount of corporate experience, it is good for it. So including yours, are there like any like for example, there are good studios in India where they can apply?
Yeah.
So
actually, fun fact is, Aura Studio is there. RB Kavin Studio is there. Like I would recommend that. Like the thing was, my old company is so chill. You just enjoy it. Like I loved it working there. I mean, go there if the financial factor is not removed. But my company, like my old company, is there, and I think like even Hardik has a company. I'm not sure if he's hiring people. But I think
Hardik, are you? Hardik, are you? Not right now. Okay. So are you open like right now? Aura Studio is open for hiring, and what positions are you hiring?
So like actually we don't have open or closed thing. It depends. In case we need, we might hire people in case we find it useful for us at that point, because it's depending on that, right? Also, I think nowadays, but there are so many companies who started offering AR solutions out there, like social solutions out there. You can just give it a search. You're like a Google or like search. But I know like a company where most of you guys know, like we might not offer that company. But like there are companies you have to make sure you don't work with, because they are toxic companies, I would say. Just put it that way. That is the way, right? You have to make sure you just speak with other person who left it, so that you get a clear idea. Because the companies might look super fancy, but they might be internally, they would be like totally different, hard to work. So it depends on it. Like just see where they work.
The harsh reality which I have faced now, so even like I have some folks who like know that company is bad, right? But they are in this for money in the end, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And they are getting what they want, so they are ready to tolerate those toxicity. So what? Like how could you convince those people over there?
Here is the thing, like to be frank, like I follow up this thing. If you're not like, if someone is drowning and if they're not willing to get out themselves, you will not be able to help them. They would just pull you in.
Correct.
Like to give a proper analogy, right? Like, because here is the thing. Everyone here, like to be frank, like I know the fact that everyone took an initiative on a Saturday weekend to try to learn this. Whereas if you're working in multiple companies, like in my old company, to be frank, I was the only one who know the role and then hired. Whereas the rest of the developers were hired, were like a normal developers. They converted the roles. So what happens is, if you're doing that, or like if other people are working, you do a 9-to-5 job, where you do a job because you get the money. After that, you don't care about what you did in the job. You just go. That's where you are always on the time to leave the job and then enjoy yourself. You're not doing it on weekend. When it is weekend and Sundays, you try to enjoy yourself, because you hated the job so much that you work for that money to enjoy yourself. Whereas that is the thing. Like sometimes people are happy with it. Like people are happy with that factor where that is actually a comfortable life, I would say. If you're running something as a freelancer, running as a company or something, you have a lot of things happening in your back of your head. Like, how am I going to manage this financially? How am I going to get a client? How am I going to convince this client to do this work? How am I going to develop it and execute it in the given timeline? How are you going to manage the family? If you're working in a company, what happens is you get an allocated days you can take an off of. Whereas if you're a freelancer, you don't have it. You can take a day off, but if you're taking a day or week off or a month off, you don't get paid on that day. You don't do any work.
Yeah.
You don't get paid.
For freelancers, is either taking what you can say no off, or else either 6 months off, 5 months off. That is what freelancers usually do. Achha, so I think we like done with the questions from our end and everything. Is there any closing words which you want to share with us, and how should anyone who are starting with AR or who are already into AR but still confused how to like earn more? So what is the final words you would like to share with us?
So like the final words is just more about like you just explore. I would say like you to like explore waters here, like because AR and then VR is just a vast domain. Like you can develop an AR experience, you can develop an app particularly targeted towards automotive industry or like certain industry, because also as in terms of the social AR, you can target the beauty industry or you can target the gaming industry. Because of that, it's always that you do what, because AR is actually a medium of communication. It's not a complete tech. It's actually a way to communicate yourself. That's all AR is. So just explore with the tech and then communicate what you will.
Achha, so we have a question in chat, but I'll let you like write down the answer to that afterwards and we can share. So just one thing I wanted to like share to everyone. Can you share some templates for SOW which you mentioned, right? Also the cold emails which people can use. Like what all should go inside a cold email when you are approaching a client? Hey, this is the idea I want to pitch, and what all should go over there. And one more question we have from Harry is, which roadmap is better to start business in AR industry? So these are some of the questions. I would like be very grateful if you
15 seconds left.
Share